In the middle of the night, a man found himself floating alone in the Pacific Ocean, miles from shore. He had two choices: stay with the wreckage or swim into the darkness. Only one of these decisions would keep him alive. Did you know that long before he was famous, well before he was a household name, even a Hollywood icon, Clint Eastwood nearly drowned in the Pacific Ocean? That's right. See, in 1951, Clint Eastwood was a 21-year-old Army private stationed in California. He had been drafted into the Army during the Korean War and was stationed at Fort Ord in California. He had somewhat of an unusual assignment. He was a swimming instructor. He was there to teach soldiers how to survive in water. He was a former lifeguard in school, so it just made sense. And during his time in California, he decided to take leave to visit his parents in Seattle. And as a Army private pro typically doesn't have a lot of money, he had to ask the military for a ride home. It's called Space A. So the U.S. Navy gave him a ride on a U.S. Navy Sky Raider. The aircraft typically fly in pairs, and so this is no different. So two Sky Raiders left Seattle, and as they entered the airspace around San Francisco, they found themselves flying in dense fog, as we all know there is. The two aircraft became separated. To further complicate the situation, Clint Eastwood's plane ran out of fuel, and the pilot, not able to see land, made the decision to ditch into the ocean. Now see, ditching an aircraft into water is significantly harder than it sounds. See, at night, first of all, the horizon disappears, and water, whether it's day or night, looks flat from above. You can't see that the water is rising and falling, and particularly unpredictably. So, if the aircraft ditches and you strike too hard, the aircraft will inevitably break apart. If you try to ditch an aircraft in water too softly, the wing might catch, you might flip, you might spin around, it just becomes worse. So luckily, they hit the water pretty hard, the aircraft remained upright, and the aircraft began filling with water immediately and sank within minutes. But both men are out and were able to deploy life rafts. Therefore, now they had a new problem. They didn't know where they were. They didn't know which direction land was. The waves were crashing all around them, but they were alive, and they were in the Pacific Ocean in the darkness. They couldn't see. They couldn't hear lands crashing. They had no lights. They didn't know if during the crash landing that the plane flipped around, spinning them in a weird direction. They were heading south, but who knows? This is now a situation where the wrong decision will cost both of them their lives. They could decide to stay with the aircraft and hope a search and rescue plane would look for them, probably tomorrow, the next day. They could decide to paddle towards shore, but which direction was shore? They had no idea. And in the middle of the ocean, the swells can travel whichever direction the wind is. Teaching soldiers how to survive in water involved a lot of pool training. But being in the middle of the ocean, well, that's not the same as being in a pool. To further complicate the situation, now it's California, cold water, it's the coast. Great white sharks breed in that area. Therefore, there were a lot of reasons to fear for their lives. First, of course, they had the cold water, and if anyone swam in the Pacific Ocean, you know that the water is extremely cold. The fall air temperatures. Now we had sharks to mention. Not to mention they couldn't see land now, and they didn't know which way to paddle. But they followed the swells, and the swells slowly carried them towards the coast, or so they hoped. In separate rafts, but together, they paddled for hours. Near the shore, the swells became waves, the waves began to break, and they could hear. So at least they knew they were getting closer to shore, because they could hear the waves crashing. But now the two rafts became separated. Both men were now alone, fighting for their lives independently. The waves, they began getting steeper and breaking them, pulling them back out to sea and pushing them back in. Ultimately, wave capsized Private Clint Eastwood's raft, and he found himself in the water again. This time, arguably in a significantly more dangerous situation. The surf is way more dangerous than the open ocean because of the shifting currents, the frothy nature of water, the breaking of the water and the bubbles that are in it. It's harder to stay afloat. And so Private Eastwood started swimming towards land. They could barely see. He could mostly only hear. A wave would come and push him forward, but the next one would drag him right back out again, sometimes laterally to the beach. He would almost reach footing, but then the water would pull him under and out again. He was in a very precarious situation. After a while, the real danger wasn't only drowning, it was the cold. It was the exhaustion. See, cold water drains your strength, breaking surf steals your air, and when you combine that with fatigue, it begins to destroy your judgment. He could have stopped fighting and let the ocean take him, and which honestly would have been easier, or he could keep forcing himself forward and one wave at a time. There was no pep talk from a coach, no words of encouragement from a family member, no heroic moment. He found the inner strength and determination. He kept going. See, he stopped fighting the waves and started timing them. He rested between the sets and he moved only when it mattered. Slowly, he gained ground. First his feet held, then his knees, and then the sand supported his whole weight. And after several hours of fighting the ocean, Clint Eastwood crawled onto the beach alone. He was cold and absolutely exhausted, but he crawled and found his way to a radio shack where they were able to get assistance for him. So, the crash never became a famous story. It happened way before Hollywood, before Westerns, before anyone even knew his name. But it revealed something important. The most dangerous moment wasn't the plane crash. It was the moment he realized nobody was coming. Survival depended entirely on him. Sometimes survival requires strength, and sometimes it requires skill. Heck, sometimes it requires luck. But it usually always requires to refuse to quit when safety is ahead within sight. It's refusing to quit in general. Therefore, a moment when waiting feels safer than acting, but action might be the only path left, there comes a moment when one decision changes everything. This is the decision point.